All right, so let's get cozy by the fire today and dive into medieval winter survival.
Ooh, sounds chilly.
It does, right? But I think we're going to find some pretty amazing stories of ingenuity and resilience.
I love those. I'm ready.
Yeah, and we're talking about survival even through something called the Little Ice Age.
Oh yeah, the Little Ice Age. But well, it's a little bit of a misnomer, you know. I mean, it lasted for centuries, like from the 14th to the 19th century.
Wow.
Yeah, so not so little, right?
No, not at all. Okay, so centuries of really cold temperatures, intense snowstorms.
Yeah, pretty much. And a Europe that was honestly pretty unprepared.
Yeah. And speaking of our sources, we've got a pretty interesting mix for this deep dive. We've got articles on daily medieval life. We've got survival guides, or at least accounts of what they did, medieval farming, and even some stuff on medieval cuisine.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah. So no Uber Eats, no heated blankets. How did they manage?
It is fascinating, isn't it? I mean, we're so reliant on all these modern conveniences that we forget just how resourceful humans can be.
Yeah, for sure.
But speaking of being unprepared, our sources mention that Western Europe, which was used to milder winters, they really struggled the most.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
Just imagine the shock when the temperatures plummeted and then, the towns were buried in snow and they realized that their normal winter routine, it just wasn't going to cut it.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. We've got these firsthand accounts from Florence in 1359 where people were trapped in their homes for days because of the snow.
Oh, wow.
And it wasn't just an inconvenience either, right?
No, no, not at all.
There were pretty dire consequences.
Yeah, our sources talk about these really tragic consequences. There's one account that's really chilling from the Lozère region in France in 1389, and they talk about the homes collapsing under the weight of the snow, and then of course, the food supplies ran out and people perished from the cold or starvation. It's a really grim picture of how unprepared they were.
Yeah, that's enough to make me want to hibernate until spring.
Yeah.
So let's maybe dive into some of the tactics they used, starting with shelter. So I'm picturing like cozy cottages, roaring fires, or was it a little bit more, rustic?
Let's just say that the term cozy might need a little bit of tweaking. Forget insulation as we know it. You're talking about drafty houses with cold air just seeping in through every nook and cranny.
Oh yeah.
Glass windows were super rare, so they were often replaced by things like oiled paper or even just a thin cloth stretched over frames just to keep out the worst of the elements.
Wow, I can't imagine that was very effective.
No.
So bundling up, I guess, was super essential. But what did their winter wardrobes look like?
Well, you got to think wool, fur, and leather. Those are your go-to fabrics for warmth and durability.
Yeah.
They would wear heavy woolen tunics and cloaks. Sometimes they would even line them with fur for extra warmth. And underneath all that, they have linen undergarments for added insulation. And you can't forget the hoods and the mittens and the thick stockings, essential for keeping those extremities warm.
I bet a good pair of wool socks was like gold back then.
Yeah.
So it sounds pretty practical, but also maybe a little scratchy. And was there a difference in how, say, peasants dressed versus the wealthier folks?
Oh, absolutely. Clothing wasn't just about function, it was also a status symbol.
Ah, okay.
So while peasants relied on sheep's wool, the nobility would be strutting around in their imported furs like sable, mink, ermine, the fancy stuff. It's just really interesting how, even in the face of brutal winters, that social hierarchy still played a role.
Even when it's freezing, fashion finds a way. But survival wasn't just about staying warm, it was also about having enough to eat, right? And so no refrigerators, no grocery stores. How did they manage the food situation?
Ah, this is where things get really ingenious. Food preservation, that was their superpower.
Okay.
They mastered techniques like fermentation. So you're thinking sauerkraut, beer, wine, cider, always to make food last longer.
Yeah. Okay.
And let's not forget drying, smoking, salting, storing root vegetables in cool cellars. These folks were the original preppers.
They were. Wow. It's amazing. I'm starting to see a real theme of resourcefulness here. But what about fire? I mean, that had to be a constant need, right?
Oh, absolutely. Firewood was like gold in the winter. Gathering and chopping wood was a never-ending chore, especially with those drafty homes.
Yeah.
It makes you appreciate just slipping a switch on your thermostat.
It does. You really take it for granted. So they've got their somewhat weatherproofed homes. They've got layers of wool and a cellar full of preserved goodies. What did a typical winter day look like for them?
Well, farming was pretty much out of the question.
Yeah, I can imagine.
The fields were covered in snow, the ground was frozen solid, so daily life pretty much shifted indoors.
Okay, so picture this. It's a dark, cold winter evening in a medieval village. The wind is howling outside, but inside, families are huddled around the hearth and the fire is crackling.
Yes. It was a time for indoor tasks like, weaving, mending clothes, sharpening tools,
Yeah,
and of course, storytelling. It was a chance to be productive and connect with each other while they waited for spring to return.
I love that. I could almost smell the wood smoke and hear the stories being told. I'm sure there were some pretty crazy stories given how harsh the winters were. Oh, wait, I think you mentioned this earlier. Didn't some people share beds with their livestock?
Ah, yes, you remember that little detail? It might sound really strange to us, but warmth was so precious.
Right.
Some families would actually bring their animals inside not just for the company, but also for their body heat.
So wait, hold on. You're snuggled up in bed, and next to you is a sheep, a cow.
Okay, maybe not a cow, but smaller livestock like sheep, goats, or even chickens
Yeah.
would have provided a surprising amount of warmth in those poorly insulated homes.
Makes sense, I guess.
It was all about survival, and it shows just how close that relationship between humans and animals really was back then.
Okay, I think I'm starting to understand the true meaning of cozy in medieval terms. It's just amazing to think that they could make it work in such challenging circumstances.
It is, and it's a good reminder that our modern ideas of comfort are pretty, well, modern.
They are, aren't they? So we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. We've talked about those harsh realities of the Little Ice Age. We peeked inside their drafty medieval homes, and we've uncovered some of their amazing survival tactics. But there's still so much more to explore, right?
Oh, there is. We've only just scratched the surface of medieval winter life. There's still so much more to talk about. Their social interactions, their economic challenges, their religious beliefs, even their leisure activities.
All that.
Oh, yeah. We're going to delve even deeper into this fascinating world in part 2, so stay tuned.
I can't wait.
Welcome back to our journey through the medieval winter. Last time we were talking about those drafty homes, remember? And the hearty stews and oh yeah, the livestock cuddles.
Oh, yeah, how could I forget?
So now let's dive into how winter impacted the medieval economy. Because when the ground's frozen solid, you can't exactly plant crops, right?
Yeah, my thumbs are already getting sore just thinking about all that plowing and harvesting they did, even in the warmer months.
Right.
So what happened to their livelihood when winter hit? Did everyone just hunker down inside and wait it out?
Well, not quite. Remember that resourcefulness that we were talking about? Well, it really shines through here too. Our sources describe this really fascinating system of adaptation. For a lot of peasants, winter wasn't just a time of rest, it was a time for a different kind of work.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What, do they all become blacksmiths or something?
Well, some did pick up trades, but a really common path, especially for young people, was to enter service in wealthier households. It was a way to contribute to the family income while also learning really valuable skills for the future.
So like a medieval apprenticeship, learn by doing and get paid for it.
Exactly. It was a really practical solution for both sides. The young men and women would get experience in domestic tasks, crafts, or even more specialized farm work, and the wealthier families would get the extra help that they needed. It was a way for everyone to have a role to play, even when the fields were covered in snow.
Clever system. It's amazing how they turned a difficult situation into an opportunity. And for young women, this service had an extra layer of importance, right?
That's right. Our sources talk about this dowry system. Basically, a bride-to-be would bring assets, like money or goods, to the marriage.
Yeah.
And these years of service were a chance for young women to actually contribute to their own dowry, which would give them a better start in life.
Wow. Talk about forward thinking. But what about those who didn't go into service? How did they make ends meet with no farm income for months at a time?
This is where those food preservation skills that we talked about really paid off. They would rely heavily on the stores of dried meats, smoked fish, fermented goodies, and all those root vegetables that were tucked away in their cellars. It was all about stretching those resources and making them last until spring.
It really highlights the importance of planning ahead. And that makes you wonder, did they ever run out?
Well, sadly, sometimes those stores weren't enough, and our sources mention that winter was often a really lean time, and some families did face hunger, but they also did what they could to supplement their stores.
So imagine this. A group of medieval folks bundled up in layers, they're trudging through the snow, their breath misting in the frosty air. Where are they headed?
Well, they might be out hunting for game, or they might be setting traps for rabbits or hares. And if the rivers weren't completely frozen over, they might even try their luck at ice fishing.
Okay.
And they would also forage for anything edible, like nuts and berries, or even wild plants that could be used for, medicinal purposes.
It just paints a picture of resilience, doesn't it?
Hmm.
Making the most of every opportunity, even in those harsh conditions.
Absolutely. But it wasn't just about finding food. Winter also disrupted trade and commerce, which threw another wrench into the medieval economy.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, imagine trying to navigate those muddy, snow-covered roads with a cart full of goods. Not exactly a smooth ride.
Exactly. So, for starters, goods became more scarce and therefore more expensive.
Right.
Imagine the basic necessities, like salt or iron or textiles. Suddenly, those things are harder to come by, and there's a hefty price tag attached to them.
Ouch. Talk about a winter budget buster.
Yeah, and those who are already struggling really felt the pinch. But there is a flip side to this, too. While trade slowed down, certain indoor industries actually flourished during the winter months.
Okay, so while the farmers are taking a break, who's keeping busy? Are we talking about a medieval version of Etsy, where everyone's crafting woolen mittens by the fire?
Haha. Not quite Etsy, but you're getting the idea. With fewer daylight hours and less farm work to do, people really focused on the tasks that could be done inside. Think weaving, spinning, woodworking, leatherwork, metalworking, those sorts of things.
So it wasn't all doom and gloom. Winter actually provided a boost to certain sectors of the medieval economy.
Exactly. And these crafts weren't just about making ends meet either. They were skills that were passed down through generations, preserving those traditions and creating these beautiful, functional objects that we still admire today.
It's amazing how they turned what we might consider downtime into this time of productivity and creativity.
Yeah.
But even the most resourceful folks need a break now and then, right?
Yeah.
So what did medieval people do for fun during those long winter nights?
Well, they didn't have Netflix or video games, so entertainment was a little bit more, shall we say, analog.
Okay.
Storytelling was huge. Picture families gathered around the hearth, the firelight, casting those flickering shadows as they listened to tales of heroes and mythical creatures in faraway lands.
Ugh, that sounds almost magical. A way to escape the cold and the darkness and just let their imaginations run wild.
Exactly. And music played a big part too. Our sources mention these traveling musicians, troubadours and trouvères,
Yeah.
and they would entertain courts and communities with their songs and poems and instruments.
So live music even back then, what kind of instruments did they have?
Oh, they had lutes, harps, flutes, drums, you name it. They even had bagpipes. Just imagine the sound of bagpipes echoing through a medieval hall on a snowy night.
I'm getting chills, but in a good way. It's incredible how music just transcends time. It brings people together and it lifts spirits. But what about games? Did they play anything besides pin the tail on the donkey?
Well, that might have been a little too rowdy for a medieval winter evening. But they did enjoy board games, especially chess. That was a favorite among the nobility. It was a game of strategy and intellect, perfect for those long winter nights.
And speaking of strategy, I bet it took some serious planning to get through a medieval winter. Did they have any special rituals or traditions to help them cope with all those challenges?
They did indeed. One really fascinating tradition was wassailing.
Okay.
It was this festive ritual involving singing and drinking cider to ensure a good apple harvest the following year.
Oh, wow.
It was a way to celebrate, connect with nature, and maybe even ward off any bad luck.
I love that. It just shows how they found ways to infuse even the darkest months with this sense of hope and celebration.
Exactly. Winter wasn't just about enduring hardship. It was about adapting, innovating, and finding those moments of joy and community amidst the challenges.
I'm already feeling more prepared for next winter.
Yeah,
But we've still got more to uncover, right? Their health practices, religious beliefs, even their relationship with the supernatural. It's all waiting to be explored.
you're right. We've only just begun to scratch the surface of medieval winter life. Stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive where we'll unravel the mysteries and marvel at the ingenuity of our medieval ancestors.
Well, here we are, the final part of our journey through the medieval winter. It's been a wild ride so far. We've seen their ingenuity with shelter and food, and even turning a lack of farming into an opportunity.
Yeah, it really is amazing how much we've uncovered. They were such a resourceful group, making the most of what they had and figuring out how to not only survive but also connect and celebrate during a time that could be pretty brutal.
It's true, and it makes you really appreciate, all the things we have today. But we can't forget that winter also brought some serious health challenges. No modern medicine, no
Mhm.
antibiotics. How did they deal with illness when it struck during those harsh months?
Well, it was definitely a time when knowledge and tradition were key. They didn't have our understanding of germs or viruses, so they relied heavily on herbal remedies that had been passed down for generations.
Okay, I'm listening.
So think about things like chamomile for upset stomachs, willow bark, which is a natural pain reliever, and just the whole apothecary of plants and herbs that they used for various ailments.
It's fascinating how they turned to nature for healing. But did any of it actually work?
You might be surprised. A lot of those traditional remedies have actually stood the test of time and are still used today in modern herbal medicine. I mean, they weren't always perfect, but they definitely understood the power of plants and how to harness that power for healing.
It's true. It does make you wonder if we've lost touch with some of that ancient wisdom, doesn't it? But what about serious illnesses or injuries? Those must have been even more terrifying back then.
Sadly, that's true. Winter could be really dangerous for those who are already vulnerable. The cold weakened the body, and access to skilled healers was very limited, especially for the poor. And of course, traveling in winter was treacherous, so just getting to a healer could be a life or death situation.
It's a stark reminder of just how different life was back then. But they weren't completely helpless, though, right? What about those who practice medicine? What were they like?
Well, you had a real range of practitioners. You had village healers who relied mostly on folk remedies, and then you had university trained physicians who were more familiar with the medical theories of the time, even if those theories were a bit off by today's standards.
So, kind of like today, your access to care really depended on your social standing and where you lived. But even with limited medical knowledge, they must have had some ways of coping mentally and spiritually with the darkness and hardship of winter.
Oh, absolutely. Religion played a huge role in their lives and offered a lot of comfort and hope during difficult times. Winter, with its long nights and harsh conditions, was often seen as a time of testing, a time to really draw strength from one's faith.
Of course, you can't forget Christmas falls right in the middle of winter. Was the holiday celebrated differently back then?
Oh, for sure. Just imagine a time before all the commercialization that we see today. It was a much more solemn occasion, a time for reflection and celebrating the birth of Christ as a symbol of hope and renewal amidst all that darkness.
It sounds beautiful in a way, just stripped down to the core meaning of the holiday. But we can't talk about the medieval winter without mentioning the supernatural, right? All those long nights, the howling wind, the flickering candlelight. It's like the perfect setting for ghost stories and spooky tales.
You're reading my mind. The boundaries between the natural and supernatural were definitely blurred in the winter. Those long nights were filled with tales of ghosts and witches and all sorts of mythical creatures. And these weren't just stories to scare children, they really reflected a worldview where the supernatural was a very real and present force, especially during those darkest months.
It really does make you wonder if they saw those long, dark nights as a time when that veil between the worlds was thinner, doesn't it? Were there any specific traditions or beliefs that stood out in your research?
Well, one that comes to mind is this tradition of leaving offerings for the fairies or the spirits, especially around the winter solstice. It was a way to appease these beings and ensure a safe and prosperous winter.
Oh, wow, I love that. It just shows how deep their connection was to nature and their belief in a world beyond what we can see. It's amazing how even these seemingly simple acts can reveal so much about a culture and their beliefs.
It really is. And it's a reminder that even when they were facing such hardship, they found ways to find meaning and connect to something larger than themselves.
I think we've just about journeyed through every nook and cranny of the medieval winter, from their resourceful survival strategies to their spiritual beliefs and even their spooky tales. It's been an enlightening deep dive.
It really has been fascinating, and it leaves me with this feeling of admiration for their resilience and their ingenuity. I mean, they faced challenges that we can barely imagine, yet they figured out how to adapt and connect and even find joy in the middle of the harshest season.
Yeah, and I think that's the perfect note to end on. It's a good reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit really can shine through. So, next time you're bundled up by the fire sipping your hot cocoa, take a minute to think about those medieval folks who braved the elements all those centuries ago. They might not have had our modern comforts, but they definitely had something just as valuable, a deep connection to their community, their traditions, and the world around them.
And who knows, maybe they even had some insights into resilience and resourcefulness that we could learn from today as we face our own challenges.
I think so too. So, until our next deep dive, stay curious, stay warm, and keep exploring this fascinating world of history.